Welcome, everybody. It's going to be an exciting day today. We are going to have a lot to cover, and it's going to be a very thought-provoking, but I think it's a good exercise for us to go through. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? There was a post that came up, an article. All right, I don't know if anybody saw this article, but it was in Newsweek. And it was very controversial. John Eastman, he's a professor of law. He's a conservative pundit, actually. And he wrote this article in Newsweek. And what did he say? He said, the fact that Senator Kamala Harris has just been named the vice presidential running mate for presumptive Democrat, well, now he is the nominee, Joe Biden, have some questioning her eligibility for the position. Whoa, what do you mean? Well, it says that the 12th Amendment provides that no person constitutionally ineligible to be the president should be eligible for the vice president. Meaning, if you can't serve as president, since the vice president is a heartbeat away, you can't, whatever requirements apply to the president also apply to the vice president candidate. Now here, he quotes Article 2 of the Constitution. And it says, no person except a natural born citizen, ... in the article, shall be eligible to the office of president. Okay, no person except, so that means in order, it seems to say here, to be eligible to be the president, you need to be a natural born citizen. Her father, Kamala Harris is a Jamaican national. Her mother was from India, and neither of them were naturalized U.S. citizens at the time of Harris's birth in 1964. Okay, so that, according to some of the commentators, makes her not a natural-born citizen and therefore ineligible for the office of the president and hence ineligible for the office of vice president. All right, immediately, this caused the firestorm. And here's an example from the Los Angeles Times. Opinion. Of course, Kamala Harris is a citizen. That Newsweek column was a specious distraction. Now, wait a second. Did the original author of Newsweek say she wasn't a citizen? He didn't say that. He said she wasn't a natural-born citizen. Now they're switching that and putting words in his mouth saying she wasn't a citizen. And look what he says here. She was born in the United States and is eligible, in fact, extremely qualified to be vice president and president. Let's start with that. Well, that's the bias that he's coming into this discussion with, isn't it? He's presuming she's qualified and eligible. Newsweek offered a feeble explanation for a column suggesting that Senator Harris might not be natural-born citizen, denying that the column was an attempt to ignite a racist conspiracy theory around Kamala Harris's candidacy. Whoa. So you can take a look at the whole article here. More media outcry. Nonsense, runs the counter commentary. Indeed, PolitiFact rated the claim of ineligibility as pants on fire false. Snopes said it's false. And from the other side of the spectrum, even the conservative Daily likewise rated it as false. All three simply assert that Harris is ineligible. She is eligible because she was born in Oakland. And since she's born in Oakland, she's therefore a natural-born citizen from location of birth. Interesting. Okay, everybody with me? He writes this article, says she's maybe not a natural-born citizen because her parents weren't citizens at the time of her birth. Everybody goes crazy. What do you mean she's not a citizen? Of course she's a citizen. Pants on fire, which virtually is canceling him and Newsweek. So what does Newsweek do? Right? Stick up for their guns, right? What did they do? All they did is post, let somebody post an article with a legal opinion who's a lawyer. So here became the editor's note. I don't know if you saw this. This is the society that you're in America, people. The op-ed is being used by some as a tool to perpetuate racism and xenophobia. It was a legal argument about who's a natural-born citizen, whether they're from America, white, black, England, Australia, Jamaica. The essay by Eastman was intended to explore a minority legal argument about the definition of who is a natural-born citizen in the United States, but to many readers, the essay inevitably conveyed the ugly message that Senator Kamala Harris, a woman of color and the child of immigrants, was somehow not truly American. Okay. People are projecting all kinds of stuff onto this discussion. Says Newsweek, the op-ed was never intended to spark or take part in the racist lie of birtherism. Birtherism. The conspiracy theory aimed at the delegitimizing Barack Obama, right? What's very interesting is there was somebody made a legal argument also at the time of Obama, because this same problem that applies to Kamala Harris applied to Obama. The only difference between her and Obama was his father was not a citizen. He was a Kenyan national at the time of Obama's birth. So one parent, his mother did have citizenship, but his father didn't at the time of his birth. And Kamala Harris, both of her parents weren't citizens at the time of her birth. That's the only difference between. So the same legal argument was brought up at Obama, but what they ended up doing is twisting it. And instead of focusing on, is he a natural born citizen, all of a sudden people started saying, oh, he wasn't even born in Hawaii. That wasn't the argument, but it got twisted into that because if you make it into something really extreme and weird, it's easy to cancel it. All right, so nobody ever came back to what is this natural born citizen thing. Okay, so let's go back and continue on for a second. Okay, we entirely failed to anticipate the ways in which the essay would be interpreted, distorted, and weaponized. Whoa, so that's Newsweek's responsibility? Right? As we said earlier in our note, the essay was an attempt to examine a legal argument about the difference between natural born and naturalized. The latter being ineligible to hold office of the president, meaning somebody who was a citizen of a different country and then immigrated and became like a naturalized citizen, like Trump did yesterday at the Republican conference. So in the days since the op-ed was published, we saw that it was being shared in forums and social networks notorious for disinformation, conspiracies, and racist hatred. All of us at Newsweek are horrified. They're horrified that this op-ed gave rise to a wave of vile birtherism directed at Senator Harris. Many readers have demanded that we retract the essay, but we believe in being transparent and are therefore allowing it to remain online with this note attached. You know, I was thinking about this. So they're saying, because there's some crazy people out there, they're going to take what you wrote and distorted it and read something else into it to further their agenda. I should retract and unpublish and not share what my opinion is. You hear that? If that was true, people, the Jewish people wouldn't be teaching Torah anymore. If I was worried about somebody taking my Torah and distorting it and reading into it stuff that isn't there, and if that starts happening, I should retract my Torah and unpublish it and cancel myself. That's kind of weird, right? So good for Newsweek. They didn't totally collapse, right? All right. So now we got a lot to cover, so that's why I'm going quickly. I'm a rabbi. I'm in Israel. But I want to share with you that I every day, I spend 45 minutes to an hour on a Zoom group. I mentioned this last time, studying a page of Talmud. It takes 7.5 years to go through the Talmud. Now, this issue, the confusion, and I've done a lot of research about this natural born citizen issue. If you take a high school yeshiva student who's in his teens, who studied Talmud for a little bit, he could take this apart, pick it apart, and actually figure out what the intention of the original founders were. And I'm going to share that with you. And we'll see how it works. Just by looking at the exact words, you can make some logical assumptions about what's being said here and why. So this is actually the typeface from the original Constitution. No person except a natural born citizen. Article 2, Section 1 of Article 2 of the Constitution sets forth the eligibility requirements for serving as President of the United States under Clause 5. No person except a natural born citizen or, and this was the ... that was left out, that is actually kind of crucial, or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of the president. So first thing you notice here, there's two things. There's a natural born citizen, and then there's a citizen, and they have to be different. They're not the same. There's something different about a natural born citizen and a citizen. The other thing is you need to be 35 years old, and look at this, you have to have been 14 years a resident within the United States. Okay, so we're going to have to get a definition of who's a citizen, and then we're going to have to try to figure out what's a natural born citizen. Okay, we'll come back to this in a second. The 12th Amendment says no person constitutionally ineligible for the office of the president should be eligible for that of vice president, right? We saw that in the article. So in order to be a vice president, you have to have the same criteria up here. And here's the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof of the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. Okay, so now we're getting some help here. A citizen is somebody who is born in America or not born in America. If you're not born in America, you have to go through a legal process of naturalization, right? You have to take tests and the judge has to accept you. So you can be born outside of America or born inside of America, and you have to be naturalized. Now, is it enough just to be born in America? Well, if that was true, you didn't have to say subject to the jurisdiction of. So there is a concept that there's somebody who's born in America who's not a citizen, according to the writers of the Constitution. You hear that? It's saying you have to be subject to so there's a concept of being born in America and not subject to the jurisdiction of America. That person is not a citizen. So who's that? Well, how about if the ambassador of England and his wife, who are both British citizens and not citizens of America, have a child who's born in America? Under what jurisdiction is that child born? Well, they're a British citizen by birth. Their mother's a British citizen. Their father's a British citizen. They're British, so they're not subject. So according to the original intent of the framers of the Constitution, somebody who's born, who's not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, is not a citizen. Birth is not automatic citizenship. Now, I will say, if you go and look at legal precedents and what judges have decided, et cetera, today, people who are born in America become citizens. That's evolved, but that's not what the original intent was. You see that? All right. So if you're making an assumption that anybody born, no matter who their parents were, is a citizen, then all of a sudden you're going to freak out by somebody intimating, making a suggestion. Maybe somebody whose parents weren't citizens, they were just tourists or students or whatever, and they gave birth to a child, that child was not 100% under the jurisdiction of the United States of America, because they also had allegiance to Britain or wherever it was. In Harris's case, India and Jamaica. In Barack Obama's case, his father was a British citizen, a British subject, because Kenya wasn't a country at that time, and he was therefore subject to the jurisdiction of the. So so the question is, if you're partially subject to a foreign government, where one parent is a citizen and you have citizenship there, does that disqualify you from being so do you need both parents to be citizens of the United States when you're born in America to be a natural born citizen, or one parent needs to be? or none. Doesn't seem that none applies. Okay, I get that much into the weeds. So now it's 1770s, right? Or 80s, whenever the Constitution was written. And what are they concerned about? They just separated from the British. There's loyalists. Canada were loyalists to the crown. And the Americans separated. And who knows who's whom? So what did they want? They wanted a natural born citizen. They want some, and not only that, they had to be 14 years a resident. Because what would happen if you were born in America, even by two American parents, and then they took you to Indonesia, and they raised you as a Muslim in some madrasa there, and you became an Indonesian citizen, and you never lived in America. And then you came back, and the first day you come back, you apply to be the president of the United States. They were concerned about that. They wanted to make sure that once they set up the country, that the president of the United States would not be a citizen, meaning a foreign national who naturalized and became a citizen. So therefore, that's why Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's clear to everybody he wasn't eligible. He was a naturalized citizen himself. And therefore, you're saying you're coming from some foreign country. How do we know you're not the Manchurian candidate, that you're not the Austrian candidate? So fine. Now, so therefore, we want a natural born citizen. It means somebody who's born there. But wait a second. Born there, according to the framers of the Constitution, wasn't enough just to be born there. They wanted you to be subject to the jurisdiction, which means your parents have to be subject to the jurisdiction. So therefore, it seems that a natural born citizen is somebody who's born in America to citizen parents. The citizen parents could be naturalized, or they could be natural born. It would seem, just as a simple, clear reading. Now again, they're worried. Let's take a look and see why. Why was this? So here in 1803, St. George Tucker was an early federal judge, and he wrote in the Commentaries on the Laws of England, which was the leading authority for the delegates of the Constitutional Convention, for the terms used in the Constitution, and that the natural born citizen clause is a happy means of security against foreign influence, and that the admission of foreigners into not only as president, but into our councils consequently cannot be too much guarded against. They were worried against foreigners infiltrating into the government of the United States. And therefore, it wasn't 100% allegiance to America. So in a footnote, Tucker wrote that naturalized citizens have the same rights as the natural born. They're totally equal. They are but there's one difference between a naturalized citizen and a natural born citizen, that the naturalized citizen is forever incapable of being chosen to the office of the President of the United States. In a speech before the Senate, Delegate Charles Pinckney gave the rationale to ensure experience and attachment to the country. Experience and attachment, meaning you have to live there to experience, understand it, be emotionally attached and committed and loyal to the country without dual allegiance. You know, people are always say, this issue always comes up when Jews start running for high office, and they're worried about dual allegiance. And there was a problem with President Kennedy. Remember that? There's some of you remember Kennedy. He's Catholic. Where's his allegiance? To America or to the Pope? Anybody remember that? Remember that? How it was such a scandal that a Catholic should be able to run for the office of the President of the United States. Where's his allegiance? You know, Joe Lieberman. Wait a second, what about the Jews? What happens when it comes to negotiating for on behalf in the Middle East with Israel? Are you going to be biased because you have dual allegiance? It actually makes sense, doesn't it? You make me the President of the United States? If I was an American citizen? It'd be very tough if I'm so committed to Israel and the Jewish people. I get that. Makes sense, right? You don't want any, and why in particular for your president? Because who's in charge of negotiating international treaties? The president. Who's in charge of war? That's the two main things that the president is involved in. Who we're going to go to war with, who we're going to have alliances with, and right? And who we're going to have trade deals with. All the involvement with the international community outside the borders of the United States, dealing with other countries, the president has to be natural born. To sit on an education committee, to sit what's the harm? What's the potential danger, right? If we have some crazy people up in Minnesota, okay, they can do a certain amount of damage, but they're not negotiating peace in the Middle East, right? Okay. So let's just do a quick summary. Is everybody following me? Is it too much in the weeds logic? We're okay. Let's just take a look at this. Here's a summary. There's a difference between citizen and natural born citizen. That's clear. You can't argue with that because they use both words in the same sentence in the Constitution. Whether that's evolved and changed, that's a separate deal. That's a separate argument. Only natural born citizens can become president if they have at least 14 years residency to ensure experience in and attachment to the country. Think about it, people. Imagine you had an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell that's sent by Al-Qaeda, the Wahhabis, and they're in America, and they're getting their plane licenses, how to fly planes, and they're, got jobs working, sleeper cell, non-citizens. They're here on student visas, and they have a kid, and they raise the kid, send them to Wahhabi schools, right? But the kid's a citizen because he's born here. You want that kid to be president of the United States? Does that make sense? That's what you're trying to guard yourself against. So that we have this concept, but wait a second. That's not Kamala Harris. That's not Barack Obama, right? Seems. So maybe we should make an exception for them. So we have a concept in Judaism called lo plug. Lo plug. You're right. Maybe you can make a differentiation, but if we do, now I'm going to have a million more criteria to try to decide the Al-Qaeda sleeper cell versus a mother from India and a father from there, as opposed to two parents from Yemen who have uncles who are terrorists. It's impossible, right? So the concept of lo plug is, we're saying, listen, anybody who falls in this category, where you have potential dual allegiance, right? Because you're subject to another jurisdiction at the time of birth. No, you're not natural born citizen. You can't serve. Whether you're a wonderful Kamala Harris that was like a cheerleader in San Francisco, all-American, that's not the issue. The issue is, how do we stop the Al-Qaeda sleeper cell from becoming president, the Manchurian candidate? That's what they were worried about. They were also worried about people with a lot of money coming in and buying the position. They were worried about British nobles coming over and being very charismatic and start buying everybody off. In the electoral college, you know what I mean? Like, politics can get corrupt. So they were worried about that. So they said, no, if you were not naturalized, sorry, you can't become president. Okay. Let's go back and just finish up here, and then we're going to switch over and look at the Torah, because that's what you really want to see, right? Okay, so an exception was made at the time of the drafting of the Constitution to allow citizens. Why'd they do that? Because there weren't so many people who were born there whose parents were citizens. So during those first few years of the United States of America, a lot of the guys who were potential good guys to be president, who fought the British, they were citizens, but they were naturalized citizens. They weren't born there. the fact of the matter is almost all of I think they all were born in the United States who became president. So they had to make an exception for that generation. So they said, natural born citizen, or you were a citizen at the time of the signing of the Constitution, and therefore that would allow for some foreign-born naturalized citizens to be president, but just during that first generation. Okay, someone who was born in the USA but not subject to its jurisdiction is not automatically a citizen. Not everyone born in the USA is a citizen. Foreign diplomats' children, children of migrant workers. In the early 20th century, this was the case. If there were migrant workers coming from Mexico to pick crops, and the woman gave birth, not like today, those children were not automatically considered citizens, and they got sent back to Mexico with the migrants. Just because they were born here meant nothing. There is a fear of foreign influence and or allegiance and attachment to a foreign power. So no naturalized citizen may ever become a president. So here's a couple questions I want you to think about before we move on. In the United States, is the United States a geographic entity where the citizens choose what they want it to be, what they want America to be, and anybody who's born there is American and you vote to decide what America is? Or is America an idea that the citizens commit to, meaning you have to swear and pledge allegiance when you become naturalized, and use the geographic entity to implement that idea? Okay, is it just a political entity, geographic entity, and it's a state of its citizens that choose to be whatever they want it to be? Or is it an idea that citizens commit to and use the political entity to implement that idea? In Israel, we have the same problem and the same discussion. We have another option. In Israel, we have this discussion that hasn't been decided upon amongst the people. Is Israel a state of its citizens, like every other state? Is Israel a state for the Jews? Or is Israel a Jewish state? State for the Jews or Jewish state? Meaning, is it a state for all Jews to come, and therefore, if they're all secular and there's nothing particularly Jewish about the state, it's just a state for the Jews as a refuge in case there's another Holocaust? Or is it a Jewish state? Meaning, is there something Jewish about the state? Meaning, is it an idea, or is it just a place for its citizens and it's the democracy? I hate it when people say we have to support Israel because it's the only democracy in the Middle East. That's why you're supporting us? No. You shouldn't be supporting Israel because we're a democracy in the Middle East. At any rate, everybody hear the question? That's what you're going through today, people. That's what this election is about, people in America. That's what the election is about in Israel also. Is it a Jewish state, or is it a state for the Jews, or is it a state for the citizens, where there's no difference between an Arab citizen and a Jewish citizen, and everybody can become prime minister and everybody can sit on the Supreme Court? Doesn't matter who you are or what you believe in. Or is it a state for the Jews, and therefore everybody say, oh, apartheid, right? It was founded as a state for the Jews. So should people who aren't Jewish have citizenship, or should there be a permanent residency status? Like, make up your mind, people. You vote in the UN to say we're voting for the Jewish state. You created a Jewish state. So should people who aren't Jews be citizens? And if it's a Jewish state, why did we come back here and not, they wanted to give us Uganda or Madagascar, right? We said, well, no, right? We're the Jewish people. It's Torah. This is the state, the nation of Israel and the Torah of Israel, right? What is it? So I'll tell you something. From the Jewish point of view, it's obviously that the nation of Israel is an idea and not a political entity or geography. Everybody see why? I'll prove to you why being a citizen of the nation of Israel has to do with buying into an idea and not geography. Because how the heck did we survive for 2,000 years without the land? The land is a place where we implement our nationality, which is, right, the Torah nation. You see that? There are those that say, no, Israel is a state like any other state, and it's a state of its citizens. It's kind of scary when you're negotiating peace deals and what you're willing to give up and what you're not willing to give up. That's what we're dealing with. So now you guys have, this is the discussion America has to have, because you've evolved. You've definitely evolved from what we just read in the Constitution. There's no question. Are you a state of the citizens? Are you a state of your citizens? Or is America an idea? You know, I've been watching the two conventions, right? The Republican is selling more, it's an idea. And the other one is it's a state of its citizens, because all they're talking about is racism and racism and racism. The first convention, right? So it's all, everybody's the same. Everybody's the same. And whatever everybody decides they want to do, that's what we're going to do. As opposed to, we have these ideals and that's what we're buying into. It's an interesting discussion. You have to have that national debate. It's the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, really. They're talking around it. Everybody's sort of taking their positions and then arguing at each other without saying what we're really talking about. And that's why you can never get ahead. That was going on in my Facebook group today. Everybody's like, and not talking about what the real issue is. What's the real issue, people? Nobody even knows what the real issue is. They should be talking about, right? They, you know, the Republicans think, yeah, we want originalists. There's like this Constitution, the Constitution. What? Why? All right. So that's the, whoever's in America. Hans, did I lose you? Still interested? Non-Americans. Okay. So I want to share something with you, a little bit more about the original framers of the Constitution and the mindset. What's the context? Where's everybody coming from? So let's talk a little bit about those American values, the values that the framers of the Constitution had, and the ones that came before them. So here I just discovered this. This is 3 seals from Columbia University. The one I knew about Yale. Dartmouth and Columbia I didn't know about. This is Yale. It says here, this is their seal. It says Urim v'Tumim. The Urim and the Tumim were on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And when they would come, and before they went to war, they would come to the Kohen and they would do this thing with the stones on the breastplate would light up, and they would try to get clarity on what to do. It's a prophetic thing. Here, some of you couldn't read this. Lindsay said she saw there was Hebrew in all 3. Up here on the top, above everything else is what? Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. That's the 4-letter name for God at the top of the seal of Columbia University. And over here in little letters is El Shaddai. 2 other names for God, right? We have El Elohim. These are the 2 main names for God. They have El Shaddai and Dartmouth. They have the 4-letter name, 2 different kinds of names. We'll have a discussion about that one day, and maybe you understand why Dartmouth picked these names of God. But you see, at the top of it is God on both of them. God is above everything here. This is an interesting thing you can read. Story of how Hebrew almost became the official language of the United States of America. Did you realize that? Did anybody know that? That there was serious discussion of making Hebrew the official language of the United States of America shortly after the founding of the country. Peggy, you knew that? Okay, great. So yeah, just after the revolution, don't forget that they hated the British, right? So if you're trying to disenfranchise yourself and make a total separation between you and the British, right? Let's stop speaking English. There were a lot of Germans there. We had the same thing going on in Israel. When Israel was founded, what's going to be the official language? You had lots of Jews speaking Yiddish. Maybe it was going to be German. It was a big discussion about what to make the official language. Certainly not English. They didn't like the English. Remember, the English put a blockade during the war, and they wouldn't allow refugees from the Holocaust to come in the 30s, in 1939. It was horrible. There was no love lost between the Jews here before the state was created and the British. So let's just go back and we'll see here. It's very fascinating, this story. So there was a fellow named William Gifford. He reported that some Americans planned to substitute Hebrew as the official language of the United States. He got the stories from this Count Rochambeau, the Marquis de Chastellux, who had traveled to America in 1780, right after the country was started. In the rebellion of the colonies, a member of that state seriously proposed to Congress the putting down of the English language by law and decreeing the universal adoption of Hebrew in its stead. There were good reasons to believe his story, right? Because of the linguistic separation they wanted to do from England. And another reason, the Puritans who came before them, they had a prejudice toward the original Hebrew version of the Old Testament. The New England Puritans identified with the Israelites who escaped Pharaoh's oppression. By crossing the sea, they saw themselves as the new Israel coming to America. And they took their laws from the Old Testament. The laws on the books in the colonies were coming from the Torah. William Bradford taught himself Hebrew. He wanted to read the scriptures in the original language, and his gravestone in Hebrew says, "God is the help of my life." And of course, the Puritans didn't celebrate Christmas. And as Yale President Stiles made a course in Hebrew a freshman requirement, actually all of the original universities, everybody had to learn Hebrew. In Princeton, the longest running course at Princeton today is Hebrew. And the commencement addresses were all at the original, I think, well, not all, but most of them were done in Hebrew until there were not enough people knowing Hebrew, so they switched to Latin. And then they eventually switched to English. Everybody was required. In the 1720s, they taught Hebrew, and they adopted the Hebrew onto their seals. You can read more about it here. It's a fascinating article. And here, this is the dilemma. This is a 1951 passport from Israel. And you notice it's in Hebrew up here. And down below it says, État d'Israël, passeport diplomatique. It's French. They adopted French as the language for the rest of the world when we go universally, because it was recognized at that time universally as a diplomatic language. And then eventually we sort of forgot our hatred for the British, and it's just more expedient. And now an Israeli passport has Hebrew and English on it because it's more universally accepted than French. Okay. So it makes sense that a lot of what the founders were doing in terms of the Constitution as it was written, they're bringing stuff from the Torah. Certainly the Puritans, for sure. And it's being used. All the universities were theological institutions in the beginning. And everybody had to know the languages, and you had to learn Hebrew. If you didn't learn the Old Testament in the original Hebrew, you weren't worth anything in the universities in Yale and Harvard and Princeton. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look and find the parallel in the Torah. And the reason why I decided to give this topic is because this past Shabbat, on Shabbat, it's called Parshat Shoftim. We read it all around the world in synagogue, and it came up with these verses. And I said, oh, you know what, that's pretty interesting, because they're having this whole discussion about natural born citizen being president, and we have the same thing going on in Deuteronomy in this week's Torah portion that just passed, talking about natural born citizen for a king of Israel. So it says here, when you come into the land that God, your God, is giving you, and you inherit the land and you settle it, and you say, Asima alai melech, I'm going to place upon myself a king, meaning the nation as a whole says, we want a king. Like all of the nations that are around me. Well, that's kind of weird. Why would we want a king like all of the nations? We're supposed to be different than all the nations. We'll come to that. So, but God is saying, when you come in and you say this, Som tasim alacha melech, you shall place upon yourselves a king, asher yivchar Hashem, that God will choose him, right? You can have a king. Not only can you have a king, we learn from here, Maimonides is going to tell us, this is where we get the mitzvah actually to appoint a king that God will choose. Mikerav achecha, from amongst your brethren, you shall place the king upon you. Lo tuchal letet alacha, you are not allowed to place upon yourselves ish nochri asher lo achicha hu, a foreigner who is not your brother. So this word nochri, foreigner. Nochri means a non-Jew, but it really can't mean a non-Jew here because it does not make sense, right? It doesn't make sense that just like in America, you're not going to take a French citizen that's not naturalized and have them. They're saying, in this case, the word nochri is being used as a naturalized citizen, meaning a foreigner who has become a citizen, a convert, somebody who's converted to become part of the Jewish people, a full naturalized citizen. Now, where do we see it happen? We see it happen in the time of Samuel. Here we are in the book of Samuel, where the first king is appointed. Saul's going to be the first king. So all of the elders of Israel assemble, and they come to Shmuel. That's me. That's my name. They come to Shmuel at Ramah, and they said to him, okay, you're old. We're done with you. And your sons, his sons had gone off, so they weren't appropriate to take over from Shmuel. So they said, therefore, Sima lanu melech l'shaftenu k'chol hagoyim. Give us a king that can judge us like all the nations. So it's interesting. One of the things we're going to see a difference between a king and a judge. Up until this point, Moses was a judge. Joshua was a judge. We see Shmuel is a judge. The difference between a judge and a king, in the judge, it's not an inherited position. The firstborn child doesn't inherit the position. When it's a king, like we see royal lines, it's an inherited position. In Judaism, in Torah, it's an inherited position as long as they buy into the value system, right? If they don't buy into the value system, they get passed over, right? We have a Sanhedrin who has to ratify it. The prophet has to appoint them. They say, this guy, Shmuel, was a prophet. This one, we're going to see picked Shaul, and it gets ratified by the elders. Right, here's the elders. So anyways, they say, okay, wait, so it sounds like what we just saw up here, right? When you come into the land, give us a king, Asima alai melech, like all the nations around me. So what do they say? Appoint a king to judge us like the nations. Sounds exactly what happened, right? But Shmuel's not happy. Why is he not happy? The Torah said that's what they should be doing. He was unhappy. They said, give us a king to govern us. So Shmuel goes and he starts praying to God to try to figure out what's going on here. Because basically what they're doing is they're rejecting. He's the shofet. He's the judge. The word shofet means judge, and they're saying we want somebody to judge us, to govern us. The word govern means, here in Hebrew, it says judge. So he says, give us a king to govern. So basically they're saying, no, we don't want you to be their judge anymore. Get out of here. And we don't want any of your sons. So instead of giving a judge, we want a king like the nations have. So he goes to God and he says, okay, God, what do I do? And God answers back, listen to them. Everything that they're saying to you, because it's not you that they have rejected. They're not rejecting you and saying, we don't want you, Shmuel, anymore. It's me. It's God they've rejected. So therefore, this is kind of strange, right? They're saying, give us a king like all other nations. God says when you come in and they say, give us a king like all other nations, give them a king. And now Shmuel's saying they're rejecting me. And God's saying, no, they're not rejecting you, Shmuel. They're rejecting me, God. Wow, they don't want God to be their king, right? All right, let's go to our handy Kli Yakar. Remember our Kli Yakar? We love him from the 1500s. Let's try to resolve this apparent contradiction between what the Torah is saying and what we saw the verses in Shmuel. Why are Shmuel and God getting angry if the people are just doing what it says to do in the Torah? Seems like a contradiction. Whenever we have a contradiction, you just dig deep and try to find the answers and look up the different commentaries. Okay. This is the Kli Yakar. Som tasim alecha melech. Many discuss, I'll read through this in English so we can cover territory. Many discuss doubt about this mitzvah. Is it a mitzvah to make a king or not? Because it's a little bit ambiguous in the verses. It says, "Ki," when you come into the land, you can appoint the king. You could read it if. I think I did it. Yeah, it says, "Ki tavo el haaretz." If after you have entered the land, or it says when you have entered the land. You can read it two ways. So it says if you want a king and you ask for it, you can have it. But if you don't want a king, you can live with just a judge around, right? Because all you really need is a judge to do is to do the judgments, right? You need a court system and somebody to be the head of the whole system. And God is the ultimate king, so you don't really need a king. Or does God really want us to have a king? Because God is telling us explicitly to place a king. It's a little confusing. So the Kli Yakar is going to help us resolve that. So is it necessary or not? If it's a mitzvah, if it's a commandment, why was God angry with them when they asked Shmuel for a king? So there are those who say because they said to judge us like all the nations, in the way how the nations have their king judge them. Others say, no, it's not an obligation to have a king. And the reason why the Torah mentioned it up in the Torah in Deuteronomy was a foreshadowing of what was going to happen at the time of Shmuel, right? Give us a king like the other nations. And that God allowed them to have a king to teach them a lesson. Because if you go on your own and read the rest of Shmuel over there, Shmuel says, okay, you want a king? He's going to tax you like crazy. He's going to draft your kids to work for him, right? It's not going to be fun because he's going to have a lot of executive powers. And if he's got so much power, it might not be so nice for you, right? So he warns them about it, right? And God says, let them have a king so they'll learn a lesson, right? Sometimes you got teenagers and you got to let them go with it and let them do what they wanted so they'll learn the lesson the hard way. So that's what others say. God let them have a king in order for them to learn the lesson. But here we're going to get an opinion from our Kli Yakar, our precious vessel. That's what the Kli Yakar means. That's the book that he wrote. God doesn't want them to have a king who will place upon them. Oh, sorry. What does God want? Why does God want us to have a king? Because he wants us to have a king of flesh and blood that we will have the fear and awe of in a human king, so we'll be able to learn how to have a relationship with a king of kings, right? Why do we have children? Why are we born of parents? So we can relate to God as our Father in heaven. If we didn't have parents, we wouldn't know what that means. If God has this attribute of kingship, the power of life and death over his subject, and therefore we should be worried about losing our relationship with the king by going against his will. If I have a king of flesh and blood that has that power, then I can learn that attribute, that aspect of the relationship, and then apply it to this abstract transcendent God. It's hard. It's hard. So we have human representations of this, so we can learn it and then have that relationship with the Almighty. If there's this aspect of a bride and groom relationship in the Song of Songs between God and the nation of Israel, well, if we have husband and wife relationships, we can understand what that means and then apply that and understand the difference between husband and wife versus subject king versus child parent. Okay, so that's why God wants us to have a king. He wants us to appoint a king. Therefore, it says, when you come to the land and settle it, people are going to get comfortable and want to live the life they want, right? When everything's tough in Israel, when you're fighting for your survival in America, when you're fighting for your survival, you're not so comfy and you're praying to God all the time. No atheists in a foxhole. But once everything's good and plentiful, Beverly Hills, hey, it's hard to find somebody praying. So when things get good, right, then that's the time you should ask for a king to reign upon them, to help give them the fear and the awe and stay on the right track. Otherwise, you get so comfortable in your own wealth and power, you start thinking you're God and start making up your own rules. So you need a king when things are going great. You don't need a king when things are tough because you're praying to God anyway. Okay. So the appropriate language to use was place upon us a king. We're going to go back to the Hebrew and we'll see. Place upon us, sim aleinu, and that's the word that's used in the Torah. Place upon us a king, over us, like we saw in the seals of Dartmouth and Columbia, right? God's above us. You want a king above you. However, during the days of Shmuel, they didn't say that. What did they say? Tanat lanu melech. They didn't say, give upon us a king, place upon us a king. They said, place to us, give to us a king, right? They didn't want the kind of king that's above them. They wanted a king like the nations. And how does the king like the nations around them work? The king comes and starts bribing the populace so that they will follow him. Get that? Give out all kind of goodies during elections so that people will want to follow you, right? Bribe the pot, give them what they want in order to get them to follow you. And judge them like the nations, set up a judicial system like the rest of the nations. That's all corrupt. Their courts, you could bribe, you buy off the courts, and you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Don't worry about the courts. You can get away with anything. So what was so evil in Shmuel's and God's eyes? It was the expression, lanu leshaftenu, to us. Give us a king to us, not upon us, like the nations. And God said to Shmuel, listen to them. They aren't disgusted with you, the opposite. It's to your merit, right? Because you're putting the fear of heaven in them. They want to get rid of you. They know you can't be bought off. Therefore, they're asking for a king that can be bought off, that's going to give them what they want. Anybody read current events into this? Their whole intent is that the human king will nullify my God's will to the people's will. How's the country going to be run? According to God's will or according to the people's will? So give them a king, but warn them that their king will ultimately treat them as a tyrant and take advantage of them and tax them and subjugate them and take their children as servants and slaves. And that will be their punishment for not asking properly for a king for the right reason. So in the end, they will get the king that they deserve. You get the leaders that you deserve. And that the real reason for asking for a king, the real reason they should be doing is to place the fear and awe of God upon them to help them follow his ways when times are good. So there's two ways to run the nation. One, with a king who represents God's will and leads the people in the proper path, no matter what the people demand. And two, a king who follows the will of the people for his own power and aggrandizement, whichever the way the wind's blowing, that's what he's going to do. Much more comfortable. Okay. Everybody with me? How you doing? Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we got to deal with this natural born citizen thing. So let's go and take a look at our friend Maimonides, who codified the 613 commandments, and we'll see exactly how he articulates the commandment to appoint a king and who's qualified, right? This is going to be like the Constitution part to give you the rules and the regs of how to run your country. So Israel was told, was given 3 commandments when they came into the land: to appoint a king. We just saw the verse, place upon ourselves a king; to destroy the descendants of Amalek, go to war against the enemies of Israel; and to build the temple. Now, since the appointment of the king is a commandment, why did God not want the king when the people asked Shmuel for one? Because the request was merely due to resentment, to get rid of Shmuel, right? We saw that. So the king, therefore, has to be appointed through the court. The court has to ratify it and has to be done by a prophet. So we see the prophet picks them out, say, yeah, through prophecy, I know this David guy's going to be it, Shaul's going to be it. So that Joshua was appointed, okay. And then he makes a very important point here. Ein mamidim melech mikal gerim. He says you can't set up and appoint a king from a convert, afilo char kama dorot, even after a number of generations, until his mother is a citizen. Shneamar, lo tuchal letet alecha ish nochri asher lo achicha hu. You can't place a foreigner upon you, right? Wow. So this looks like a whole natural born citizen thing, doesn't it? A convert to Judaism. When somebody converts to Judaism, they have every right. There's no difference, nothing. They're treated virtually the same and full rights, full citizen, just like we saw in the Constitution, where it says a citizen is exactly the same as a natural born citizen. Somebody who's born of Jewish parents and has a direct lineage is no different than a convert. In fact, we have to treat a convert even better. We have to have special because they're not coming in with all the family. So we have to treat them specially well. So, but a convert cannot be appointed king. Now, once we see that it's King David, the dynasty has to go through him. But there is a concept of having kings of Israel, not through Davidic dynasty. We saw the Hasmoneans. They were from the Levites. They were Kohanim. And they were appointed. That was a temporary dynasty, not forever. Ultimately, it has to revert back to David's dynasty. But there is a concept of having kings of Israel that are not from David's lineage. And therefore, we're saying you can't take one of those and ratify it even by the Sanhedrin if they were a convert. That's the limitation. So we said that a convert has full rights except for being able to be the king for the same reason. Because here he says the rule also applies in the kingship. It applies to any ministry position, and they were inherited positions. So it goes without saying that a convert cannot be appointed a judge or president of the Supreme Court. All these positions must be filled by born Jews, as it says, place upon yourselves a king from those who are close to you, all official governing positions. All right, let's just summarize. The founders of America identified with Israel and its Torah values and laws. And just like Israel, the founders saw America as an idea and a value system to create a perfected society. They also believed that it was about the value system and not the geography. The geography was only necessary as a place to build a value-based godly society. They understood that the leader, president, or king was primarily responsible to lead the country based on those values, and that a foreigner could not be trusted to fully necessarily reflect those values. Now, you might have somebody that you could trust, but we say lo plug. We don't make a differentiation because somebody might still be holding on to the idol worshiping society that they came from and going celebrating, with their grandma and grandpa, their old holidays, and they have a tendency, you know what I mean? It has to be pure value system, no chance of it being pulled away and therefore leading the people astray or adopting extra gods into the Jewish people, which did happen in the northern tribes in Israel in the north. When you had the kingdom of Israel in the north, they all believed in God, but they also had their extra little Baal on the sideboard, burn some incense to it, their little gods in addition to God. That's the danger. There was a danger of the people dictating to the king rather than the king standing firm on the American values. That's what's in America. So minimally, the king would need to be born to a mother who was born and grew up with those values, or who chose to adopt those values by naturalization, conversion in Israel, or possibly two citizen parents in the case of America. In Israel, we're strict about the mother. Ideally, you would have two parents, but as long as the mother was Jewish and they were born of a Jewish mother, then that's enough. Because we say that what does the mother do? The mother's responsible for instilling a relationship with God, monotheism in the child. The father's responsibility in the Jewish community is to teach the child Torah. That's later on. But to build a healthy relationship, a monotheistic based relationship, that's primarily coming from the mother and nurtured into the child. And also, you always know who the mother is. You're not necessarily sure who the father is. So, okay. So that's what I had to say. My blessing for you is that we take these issues that we're dealing with and try to break them down and see what's the essence of the argument, what's the primary discussion, and have a discussion about that. But for a dispassionate intellectual discussion to try to understand who's what and what's who, and don't come with a predetermined position. Once you have a predetermined position, it closes you and blinds you from seeing what's right in front of your eyes. So that's my bracha for all of us, that we do that, and that the Almighty blesses us with wisdom, that we all make the right choices and help move the world forward and bring it to its ultimate conclusion. Thank you.